and then you say excretion, and there is a difference. Yes, but then the reason is that many like bhujia, Bikaneri bhujia, yes, you will not have any sodium value for that.
Ma'am, we have taken the nutritional information given on the packet of that.
They gave on sodium.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Fine, but I think that is one maybe you should put as limitation of the study. Okay. And one general comment to everybody: whenever you are doing sampling, please give a rationale. What methodology have you, have you looked at to decide upon a sample? Because you are saying you pick up 30, somebody saying pick up 90. What is the rationale for picking up that sample? That always should be presented. Sorry to come in the way, but I thought this was very important.
Well, when it comes to the sodium estimation, you just have to do this ashing, either dry or wet, and then you elute that sample and take a reading on this flame photometer. It's just very, very simple. So, if it is not done, if you have seen only on the label, then one can adopt this technique. Very simple, and one can find oneself the sodium level. Thank you. So the last presenter, certainly not the least, Varun Tyagi. She will speak on assessment on proximate composition and antioxidant activity of stinging nettle leaves.
University and presenting a paper entitled Assessment on Proximate Composition and Antioxidant Activity of Stinging Nettle Leaves. Introduction. As you all know, free radicals are responsible for causing various health problems, and they are also responsible to create the oxidative stress in human body. And fruits and vegetables contain lots of antioxidants like beta carotene, vitamin E, and vitamin C. And vitamin E and vitamin C are the antioxidants which are responsible to neutralize the free radicals activity in the human body. And vitamin E are the most abundant antioxidant in the human body. And as you all know, with this advanced fields of medical science, many plants are used as a medicinal plants, and one of them, stinging nettle like Urtica dioica, receive the attention as a source of fiber and alternative medicines. This plant contains lots of protein, antioxidants, and which iron, magnesium, and it also holds antioxidants like which cure the disease as cancer, arthritis. The objective of the study to undertake the proximate composition of Urtica dioica leaves by standard procedure and to investigate the antioxidant activity of crude aqueous extract of Urtica dioica leaves. Methodology. The methodology of the study divided into four phases. In phase 1, preparation of leaves powder and its aqueous extract by standard protocol, and in phase 2, analysis of proximate composition of Urtica dioica leaves, that is moisture, gram per 100 gram, ash, crude fiber, fat, protein, carbohydrate, iron, calcium, gram per 100 gram. In phase 2, analysis of proximate. In phase 3, analysis of antioxidant activity of Urtica dioica leaves was done, that is free radicals scavenging activity, DPPH, total phenols and total flavonoids activity. In phase 4, statistical analysis done. The result of the study shows Urtica dioica powder on dry basis was high in carbohydrate, calcium, and crude fiber. And the antioxidant activity of leaf powder of Urtica dioica is total phenols and flavonoids. Scavenging effect of the aqueous extract of Urtica dioica on DPPH at different concentration, that is IC50 value is 62.1 μg per ml. And the conclusion of the study concludes that the Urtica dioica leaf powder contain appreciable amount of crude fiber, protein, calcium, vitamin C, and low in carbohydrate, so they can be beneficial to overcome the malnutrition condition. Thus, the study concludes that it contains average amount of phenolic compound, exhibit high free radicals scavenging activities in addition to having their nutraceuticals and therapeutic properties.
So we come to the conclusion, and we had these oral presentations spread over 2 sessions, and oral presentations, so they covered this wide area of the science of foods and nutrition, and we had lot of diversity, and like anyone here, I too would like that we would have some time for discussion, but we have already exceeded the time for this session. So discussion we can have at our level, maybe at tea time, maybe we can communicate through emails. And another information which I have, that you stay put and you look for your distinction. We have judges here who are evaluating your presentations, and there is a chance that you get a distinction. And we have 3 prizes, first, second and third. So you stay till evening and see whether your name is there, and then you will get your prize here in the valedictory session. So,
some comments, if you can give your own observations of the kind of research that is being done.
as I told right now, that the presentations, they were spread over different areas, like oral presentations, they covered this non-communicable diseases, and very widely covered disease was this diabetes mellitus type 2. And mostly the presenters, they did work on certain non-conventional foodstuffs or herbs, and either they determined their glycemic response, or they incorporated the stuff in the diets, and then they look for this their hypoglycemic action. Apart from this, on obesity also, there were a few presentations. Then on counseling also there were presentations. What I want to say is that it is about doing a thing sincerely. It may be a very small area, but a little intensiveness that has to be there. And rather than relying on labels and all such things, it is always better if we do the things ourselves, or we get it done, the analysis part, from some authentic labs. Apart from this, I have another reflection, the parting one, that they say that to be a human being, in the true sense of the term, we need to raise our consciousness from mundane matters to the matters concerning the planet, humankind, environment, and same thing we nutritionists, we inculcate towards this food and diet. If we can raise our consciousness from awareness plan to consciousness to conviction, and then we go to do the same thing with the masses. If it happens, then we can spread our list of different foodstuffs, the healthier ones so much that the nastier ones, they get a very low priority. This is going to be a kind of positive nutrition. Can we work for it? Can we have this message and build conviction, not only conviction, but also courage of conviction? With these words, I say the session is over, is closed, curtains have rung down, and I thank everyone who was associated with this session. Thank you.
For the session is Dr. Meenakshi Bakshi Mehen. Dr. Mehen is currently Professor, Department of Foods and Nutrition, MS University of Baroda, Gujarat. With a long teaching experience of 25 years, she has undertaken various research projects with different national and international organizations. She works as a technical expert for intensive training of WHO fellows on maternal and child health and nutrition. She has also served as Honorable Advisor, Chetna, Center for Health, Education, Training and Nutrition Awareness, Ahmedabad. We welcome you, ma'am. The speakers for the session are Professor Aarti Sankla, Dr. Salome Benjamin, Dr. Anil Agarwal and Dr. Rajiv Gupta. May I request Professor Ela Joshi to present a token of our gratitude to Professor Aarti Sankla. Dr. Anil Agarwal, and Dr. Rajiv Gupta. Thank you, ma'am. I now request the chairperson to take over the session.
Thank you and welcome back post the session. I hope we are all refreshed to listen to, I think, a very important technical session that we have now. Yes, since yesterday we've been talking about the burden of non-communicable diseases and how drastic the issue is and that needs to be addressed. So now we are discussing actually what can be done. And so this technical session is going to be on strategies for prevention and control of non-communicable diseases. And we have eminent speakers for this session. And for the first session, may I invite Professor Aarti Sankla to present on topic which he has given is NCD menace and preventive measures. Thank you, ma'am. Agriculture and dairy science, including designing of new courses, curriculum, restructuring of the curriculum. She has guided postgraduate and doctorate students as major advisor. She has been member of advisory committee for more than 150 researches, served as principal investigator in 6 national research projects, advisor in 3 student research projects. Topic. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning, everybody present here. Respected chairperson of this session, Professor, a learned chairperson, Professor Meher. Before I proceed, I would like to apprise the House, this august gathering, that I belong to College of Home Science, Udaipur. I am working as Dean there, and it would be, I feel pride in mentioning that this year is the golden jubilee year of our college, and we are celebrating it in a grand way. I wish to congratulate the organizing team headed by Professor Ela Joshi, the scholarly person, for selecting such a theme for organizing a national conference. The prevalence of NCD is alarmingly increasing. People from all walk of life, whosoever is concerned for this topic, they are doing their utmost, but still we are facing this challenge as on today also. So it's high time we should use a holistic approach and we should focus on prevention. So that is my topic. Next. This is the overview I am going to talk. I'll touch, because the time given is 30 minutes. I should restrict my presentation for 30 minutes. Health transition, what do we include in NCDs? Trends and projections, major causes of NCDs, preventive measures including healthy diet, physical exercise, reducing tobacco use, alcohol consumption should be moderate or reduced, mental health, that is nowadays has become very important. There are global targets, certain NCD programs are running in India, and we'll talk in the end what prevents the effective action. We are taking effective action, but still we are not able to achieve this success till date. First, next slide. Health transition. Population have experienced transition during the entire human history, not any decade. Entire human history there has been transition. Second half of the 20th century has witnessed major health transitions propelled by epidemiological transition. Earlier we were talking about undernutrition, then overnutrition. Now we are having triple burden of the disease. Injuries, infectious disease and non-communicable diseases. Then lifestyle changes we frequently are using the term lifestyle changes. This encompasses altered diets, increased oxidative stress, sedentary lifestyle, increased tobacco use, increased alcohol use, and obviously I have missed this thing, increased mental stress in this competitive era of work. Then there is demographic transition, because there is increased longevity, because of available health facilities, because of growing awareness and all that. So there is sizable increase in elderly population. Obviously it will be directly associated with the increase in the prevalence of NCDs. Then increasing global influence. These transitions has resulted in a number of health related problems, mainly communicable. We are still facing the challenges of communicable as well as non-communicable. Next. There are basic differences between communicable and non-communicable. I have written, I'll just read it out. Sudden onset, single cause, short natural history, short treatment schedule, usually cure is achieved, single discipline, short follow-up, and the person backs up to the normal level. However, in case of non-communicable diseases, which is bothering us more, gradual onset, multiple causes, long natural history, prolonged treatment it needs, care predominates, multidisciplinary, prolonged follow-up, and altered quality of life even after proper treatment. So NCDs thus are more prolonged, economically expensive on the part of country, on the part of family, on the part of society, and have extended effects. So what all do we, this may not be exhaustive list. All CVDs, diabetes, respiratory conditions, cancer, mental disorders, oral, eye disease, kidney, musculoskeletal diseases. Next. Despite the understanding regarding the issue and number of programs underway, the magnitude of NCDs is still increasing at an alarming rate. Worldwide, if we see, developed countries, there is slight decline in the magnitude of NCDs because they are switching over to vegetarianism, they are now switching over to physical activity schedules also, but in developing countries, still it is a very great problem. Trends and projections. In all, if we say, explain in one line, more than 35 million, that is 60% of total deaths are because of NCDs, and it is much higher than any other figure, maybe injuries, maybe communicable diseases, maternal, perinatal, nutritional deficiencies and all that. Then next, nearly 80% of these deaths, we should be concerned over these figures, occur in developing countries. And in developing countries also, China and India together is leading. There are more CVD deaths than in all developed countries added together. More than 9 million of deaths attributed to NCDs before the age of 60 years. Earlier the concept was when we cross the age 50 or 55, then only we'll suffer from some of the NCDs. But now even it is not sparing 35-year-old, 30 years, 40 years of individuals. So NCDs are not only a health problem, but a development challenge as well. They force many people into or entrench them in poverty due to huge expenditure incurred on this. There are direct expenditure in terms of medication costs, in terms of reduced work output, and there are indirect costs, hospitalization, attendance, doctors' expenditure, so on and so forth. By 2020, these deaths will account for 73% of deaths. Projected trends next of deaths by broad cause in developing countries. The graph clearly indicates that there is slight shift, slight decline in trend of we are suffering from slightly less number of communicable diseases, but there is steep rise in the occurrence prevalence of non-communicable diseases. Next, different outcomes, years of life, Delhi's years of life lost by cause. In general, one line emerged out, that higher the income, more will be the prevalence of NCDs and its complications. Next, NCD trends in India. Where do we stand? Again, the same thing. Cardiovascular disease, diabetes, chronic respiratory diabetes and other NCDs, more than 60%. Other communicable and injuries, 12% from injuries, uncommunicable 28%. Next, in case of diabetes, our ranking is second. We are second from the top. So China and India, the situation needs to be immediately addressed. Next, there are changing population trends of India. Population growth and improved longevity are leading to increasing number of proportion of older people. As populations age, annual NCD deaths are projected to rise substantially under the nearly universal pressures of population aging, rapid urbanization and globalization of unhealthy lifestyle. Non-communicable diseases have overtaken infectious diseases as the biggest cause of sickness and deaths. Next, projection estimates given by WHO, by 2030, CVD will emerge as the main cause of death, that is 36% of deaths in India, and majority of deaths are premature, below around 50, 40s, so there will be substantial loss of life during their productive years. So ultimately affecting the national economic scenario. Next, modern lifestyle is the biggest killer. It is a multifaceted term encompassing diet, physical activity, working condition, stress, tobacco and alcohol use. Lifestyle can include many more things. So this disturbed lifestyle because of unbalanced diet, lack of physical activity, unhealthy working environment, we are often suffering from stresses and strains. Overweight and obesity, obviously because of sedentary lifestyles, stresses and tensions, alcohol consumption, smoking and oxidative stress. Actually, oxidative stress is the underlying cause associated with so many other factors. So this will ultimately lead to NCDs. Causes of NCDs have been grouped. There are health transitions, details have been given in the box. These health transitions results in lifestyle and behavioral changes. This results in increase in risk factors like overweight, obesity, blood glucose, blood pressure, oxidative stress, and ultimately these leads to heart disease, diabetes, cancer, strokes, etc. Global challenge for NCD, we have concern, we are quite attentive, but action, we are undertaking action, but it should be given prime focus. Next, NCDs are to great extent preventable. If treated, diagnosed timely, treated timely, managed properly. Simple changes in lifestyle can powerfully present chronic diseases and promote health. Some of the changes take place relatively quickly in the late age. So it's timely action should be taken. Next, a roadmap should be planned for taking action against NCDs, including raising the priorities of NCD control, improving disease surveillance, enabling government to take comprehensive actions. They are taking actions, everybody is concerned, but comprehensive actions against the disease and protecting countries, particularly developing, from the burden of this epidemic. There is an urgent need for a comprehensive scheme which should focus on health promotion and prevention of NCDs at various levels. So next, lifestyle improvement should focus mainly on three things: dietary management, physical fitness and stress management. In totality, we should focus on all the three, then only we say that it is holistic approach. Next, life course approach for the prevention of non-communicable diseases. It is very obvious that though risk factors are there even at fetal life, infancy and childhood, adolescence, but cumulative effects are much higher in case of later middle age years. Next, preventive measures should cover millions of deaths can be prevented by implementation of certain measures like healthy diet, exercise, stop smoking, check stress, control diabetes, and regular monitoring of blood sugar. Next, one by one I've touched. Healthy diet makes better life. We should timely shift. We are doing all these things. Vegetarianism, dietary fiber, we should focus on. Antioxidants, pigments, there are number of articles appearing in magazines, newspapers also. Millets in the diet, and salt intake also should be taken care of, salt and sugar intake. Vegetarian diets, because whenever we are depending on vegetarian diets, we are consuming more of plant-based foods. That reduces risk of NCDs and particularly diabetes. In recent decades, it has been suggested that by and large consumption of fruits and vegetables should be increased, and particular colored vegetables having pigments, because these are also having antioxidant activity. They can prevent certain types of CVDs, cancers, and morbidities can be reduced. Among these, dietary fiber, antioxidants, and other bioactive constituents require special mention. These special factors are required for delaying aging process and preventing all those factors which prevents NCDs. So how much vegetable next? How much vegetables we should eat? At least by Indian standards. Otherwise, other international forum, they are suggesting for 5 a day, 7 a day, but at least Indian context, we should have at least 4 servings of fruits and vegetables. Are we really doing so? No. Even in a high income, even educated mass, we are still not consuming this much of. Next, dietary fiber. It promotes interaction with nutrients and changes the pattern of microbes colonizing in the colon. Thus, it favors fermentation and availability of nutrients and many more benefits. Fiber is essential to maintain body weight and body composition, blood levels of sugar, triglycerides and cholesterol, proper bowel function, and it reduces chronic constipation and diverticular diseases. Next, antioxidants are being focused from last decades. A typical diet contains more than 25,000 bioactive food constituents, and these may modify a multitude of processes which are related to these NCDs. Raw and fresh vegetables like green leafy vegetables, carrots, fresh fruits like citrus fruits. So these are acting as free radical scavengers and thus protecting us from NCDs. So herbs, spices and nuts which were being used in our earlier dietary pattern, these should be refocused. These are the most important targets, and these are the source of natural antioxidants in view of safety of human consumption. These contains many phenolic antioxidants. Antioxidants stabilizes, deactivates and scavenge free radicals. So thus it helps in preventing and slowing down oxidation of body molecules and protect our body from degenerative diseases. Consumers are now being aware. They are now not interested in going for synthetic medication, obviously because of their side effects. So natural cures we should focus upon, and concentrated source of natural oxidants, even in lesser quantity, can serve their purpose. Pigments also we should take care of. Different colored vegetables and fruits provide different antioxidants, carotenoids, chlorophyll, lycopene, etc. So our diet should be colorful. Articles are also appearing. Millets are equally important, having multiple effects. Detoxification of body, lowers cholesterol level, prevents onset of cancers, prevents type 2 diabetes, reducing blood pressure, protect against heart disease, aids in treating respiratory infections and the likes. Number of benefits, and in no way nutritionally these are less than any other conventional cereal. Okay. Salt intake also should be highlighted. High intake is associated with high blood pressure and stomach cancer, and ultimately atherosclerosis, CVDs and all that. So sodium requirements can easily be met by moderation in salt intake. We should restrict the intake of added salt. We should develop the taste for foods which are low in salt. Restrict intake of preserved and processed and fast foods. Eat plenty of fruits and vegetables instead of juices and all that and processed juices, and use always iodized salt, whatever little amount salt we are. Now tips to follow. We should increase in our diet locally available seasonal fruits and green vegetables. बहुत simple tips हैं, including whole grains and whole pulses. Practicing cooking methods which conserves nutrients. Washing vegetables and fruits properly. Obviously pesticide residues are there. Increasing intake of milk, buttermilk, coconut water. Reducing salt and sugar intake. Avoiding fried and processed fast foods, aerated drinks. Avoid overeating, which we have to be very careful, and taking meals at regular intervals. Physical exercise should never be ignored because it is recommended that to maintain ideal body weight and body composition, the input and output, there should be energy balance. Next, yoga and meditation, it has been recognized worldwide. Yoga can prevent, reduce, control and cure various chronic and complicated ailments which are affecting the lives of number of people these days. The yoga therapy has a number of benefits which are mentioned here. It is simple, scientific, instant, effective, extremely beneficial. Overall, we can say it improves immunity, upgrades mental programming for all-round creative personality, awakening, raising, diverting, channelizing our inner talent. Tips to follow. Exercise keeps you fit and healthy. Make daily exercise a routine. Use stairs instead of using lifts and all that. Include exercise in your routine work. Develop habit of walking, and walking, cycling, jogging, swimming, dancing, whatever suits you should be adopted. Avoiding tobacco use because it leads to many complications. Details have been given. I am not just reading it out because this is also one of the major cause for NCDs. Reducing alcohol consumption may be very small quantities because those who are consuming alcohol justifies that it has beneficial effects. But there is no cross line between what is the limited amount and when we are crossing the line. Okay, so it should always be either restricted or very limited amount, because alcohol not only results in development of NCDs, but it has socio-economic effects also, which leads to problems in the family. Mental health, the most important one, because many industries, many corporate houses, now they are taking care of mental health of their employees, because that has become a major cause. Because mental stress and strains, they lead to hormonal imbalance in the body, and in turn hormonal imbalance will lead to so many complications in the body. So depression, anxiety are common mental disorders which should never be neglected. If someone is suffering from mental illness, medical help should be sought rather than seeking help from non-conventional healers. Mental illnesses are treatable. Mentally ill and their families should not be discriminated, otherwise it will further create problem. And parents of children suffering from examination stress should seek timely help from the concerned doctor. Global targets: 25% relative reduction in pre-CVD, cancer, diabetes. At least 10% reduction should be there in use of alcohol. 10% relative reduction in insufficient physical activity, means it should be increased. 30% reduction in salt and sodium intake. 25% relative reduction in blood pressure. We should try to maintain normal blood pressure as far as possible. Halt the rise in diabetes and obesity. If you are diabetic, if you are obese, you should check it immediately. At least 50% eligible people receive drug therapy and counseling. to prevent heart attack and strokes. 80% availability of affordable basic technology and essential medicines are required to treat NCDs, both at public and private level. Preventive programs, Government of India has supported the states in prevention and control of NCDs through several vertical programs. Prevention and control of non-communicable diseases for cancer, diabetes, CVD and stroke. Pilot program on prevention and control of diabetes, CVD and stroke. National Cancer Control Program, National Mental Health Program, Tobacco Control Program, Oral Health Program, Rehabilitation and Care for Elderly. Next, broadly across programs, certain experiences, this is only a repetition. Following experiences were observed and lesson learned in the implementation of program which need to be addressed during this later phase of 12th five-year plan. So the states needs to be given flexibility, there should be integration in the program, convergence would be critical, integration of cross-cutting components like health promotion, prevention, screening of population, training, referral services, emergency medical services, public awareness program management, monitoring, evaluation would save on cost and make implementation more effective. Next. There are certain myths about NCD that it is disease of affluence, of aging. It is not. Now it is infiltrating in the young and lower middle income group also, equally prevalent in men and women, and not restricted to only aged individual. There is underestimation of prevention impact, low public visibility, lack of direct economic interest, conflicting messages. So finally I would say we have a rich heritage which is required to be re-practiced. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for a very, very detailed and very good presentation. And I think we have a lot of talking points from this presentation, which I think we'll discuss during the panel discussion that we have. Now I call upon the next speaker, Dr. Saloni Benjamin. She will be speaking on feeding practices for critically ill, non-communicable disease patients. She's actually given a very, very short introduction, but she is a very, very large and important figure in the area of clinical nutrition. She has been designated as a chief medical nutritionist and has been is presently working as president and founder member of Association of Diabetes Educators Program. She has authored a lot of books, published, presented papers, articles, reviews, chapters in books, etc. Regular speaker and chair at national and international conferences. Thesis guide for medicine, endocrine and dietetics students. External examiner for Mumbai University and SNDT University. Principal, pro-principal, investigator in several clinical trials, that's very important. And visiting faculty in Mumbai University, SNDT University and medical colleges. She is a key opinion leader, nutrition expert and advisor of various committees and boards of nutraceuticals. Ma'am, I welcome you to this important session and look forward to your presentation on feeding practices in critically ill NCD patients. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, one and all, the dignitaries, the resource person, and I would like to thank the organizers to have me here from Mumbai. This is my first visit and I have loved it. And I hope you gain some knowledge from what I present. Before I go over, because my presentation is quite different from other presenters, I would like to know how many of you are working in a critical area. Anybody here? I don't think so. 1%? Sir is there. Yes. So, anyway, I would like to go a little slow and let you know, because when you come out of these institutes, you may come and work in a critical area, in a hospital, or maybe in your family, patient will be admitted in an ICU and you should what you should know, how you should look after the patient. Few basics you will come to know. So go over to the presentation. What do we see in an ICU? Since you all have not seen, there is pre-existing malnutrition. Whether it is NCD patients, we have seen so many NCD patients, and all of them land up in an ICU and they are very critically ill. Whether they are cancer or whether they are COPD or whether they are diabetes or whether they are obesity, and most difficult to manage are NCD. Okay, so we should be very attentive for these patients. So they will also have pre-existing malnutrition. Before they fall critically ill, they will be malnourished because they will be having low immunity because of the illnesses, all NCD illnesses, and also compromised gut, immunocompromised. They will have hypercatabolism, increased requirement of nutrients, specific or multiple organ. You will never see, as yesterday one of the speakers said, that diabetic is never only a diabetic. Okay. Same way, obese person is not only obesity. There will be other comorbidities along with these illnesses. There will be sepsis, trauma, fever, metabolic abnormalities, increase in energy. All these lead to increase in energy requirement and marked loss in lean body mass, which we are more concerned. As nutritionists, our eyes should be on this, that how do I decrease this lean body mass loss. And the key point is nutritional support is often vital for survival in critical illness. And this, I tell you, is missed out. There are very few intensivists or surgeons who call a nutritionist to a ICU to see a patient. Still, we are yet to develop that. But it is very much vital. They may do everything to salvage a patient, but in absence of nutrition, still the mortality rate will be very high. So we are very vital because nutrition is vital. So let's look at the physiologic changes in critical illness. When patient is admitted in critical illness, all of you know that patient is nil by mouth, NPO. It's a practice. It's not mandate. In fact, we as clinicians or as surgeons or a nutritionist have no right to not to feed patients. Ethically, all the patients, all the human beings should be fed, whether critically ill or normal or the normal illness. So what happens when there is no support? Adequate word should not be there. There is no support. It's a form of starvation. They starve. The cells starve. Skeletal muscles catabolize for gluconeogenesis and energy. And this is the reason why they lose lean body mass. They lose the skeletal muscles. And there is, yes, acute phase protein synthesis is there during this critical illness. And there is energy is being provided. The physiological, the creator, the Almighty has created our physiology, the body in such a way that even in this stress, it meets the need. So this acute phase proteins meet our, there is a rapid turnover and it meets the energy need as an additional source of energy and adapt to the stress illness because we are not feeding, they are NBN. But that can last only for a short illness. Minimum 3 days you can keep the patient and they will have acute phase protein providing energy. But when it becomes more than 3 days, this becomes maladaptive. No more additional energy provided by these turnover of the proteins. So what do we see in this? Since I am a medical nutrition therapist, each therapist should have a goal for a treatment. And you know that it's a big word, medical nutrition therapist. But there are no set goals for critical patients. As these patients will have so many other comorbid illnesses. So each individual patient, we should decide the goal should be treatment. What should be the concept? Yesterday we learned a lot from our dear friend Gurdev. That conceptualizes nutrition. So what is needed for that particular individual lying in that critical care ICU bed is what we need to plan. Again, I would say, if we give a good support, we will save all these patients. So how do we start? Yes, assessment is very important. As a nutritionist, we have been talking a lot about assessment, but none of us go through the detailed assessment. That is nutrition care process. Everyone who is studying nutrition should evaluate a human being in such a way that you don't miss out anything. The first begins with screening. Nutrition screening. How does the doctor do screening? We should also do nutrition screening, then nutrition assessment, then nutrition diagnosis, then nutrition intervention, and then follow. If you don't follow this process, you are nowhere a therapist and you cannot meet your targets and goals. Okay? So when you are going to go out from these institutions, learn these things. So we begin, we see the notes of the clinical notes, we see whether hemodynamically stable. This also in a current evidence-based practice, even if the patient is not hemodynamically stable, the nutrition is vital. There are enough number of studies which I am not going to show you today, but I am telling you. So if an intensivist tells me, ma'am, this patient is not stable, I will not feed, then I say, hello, we are in 2016, and even if the patient is hemodynamically unstable, I can still feed because I know how much to feed, I know what to feed, and it will help in becoming more stable hemodynamically than worsening. So that knowledge you should have, to-date knowledge. So you do the screening using a tool, screening tools. And in an ICU setup, in an hospital setup, two tools are mostly used, is SGA, Subjective Global Assessment, which does not require any equipments or gadgets, okay? And MUST is used for an indoor patients where you can make the patient stand, weigh and do anthropometry, okay? So we do Subjective Global Assessment and then we decide what is the route of the administration. That's more important. So if general condition is stable, then enteral nutrition is started. If general condition is little dicey, then I can start both enteral and parenteral nutrition. And I tell you, I come from a a public sector hospital, 2000 bedded at the medical college, and we do this judiciously for every patient. And all the patients in the hospital, 100 ICU patients, whether they have to be prescribed parenteral or enteral, it should go from my desk. No intensivist, no surgeon, no physician should be writing what and what not. They just make a reference for enteral feeding, parenteral feeding, and it is our team assesses and plans the feeding. Okay. So if GC is poor, I will say, all right, I will start with parenteral and then add enteral at the second day, third day, or 72 hours. Okay. So always an enteral is preferred route over the parenteral. This is evidence based. Okay. Now this word may be familiar to you. This is a hydration status marker. If you will say, why a nutritionist should see all this? But when you are writing down the clinical notes, if you have missed out this, how am I to decide how much volume do I give to the patient? Whether patient's hydration status is overload or whether patient is oliguric or having a less hydration. So this is a central venous pressure done by every intensivist. It's a general central line is inserted, Keva fixed when the patient is admitted to an ICU, and it is measured. See, you can see the red line, the mark there. I think the pointer is there here. Not there?
Middle.
Okay. It's not coming.
Anyway, you can see the red mark.
Yeah, you can see the red mark here. So this is the line, here it is the water level and here it is the blood. So where you irrigate the tube with this thing and the marker is that, this is done by the residents of the ICU, and this will tell you what is the status. Now I will tell you that why do we do this. Central venous patient's reading should be teamed with clinical presentation. What is the condition you will know, appearance of the skin, lips, eye and mouth. input and output. It should be titrated with, it should be also titrated with edema, electrolyte imbalance and kidney disease, and low albumin levels with low CVP. Because sepsis will generally have, the patient with sepsis will have low albumin levels and CVP will go high. So when patient is in sepsis and CVP is high, I should not reduce the volume because I know the reason why the CVP is high. So, and also the drug administration. So faulty CVP measuring could give false impression of dehydration or fluid overload. And in renal patients again it will be a faulty marker. So you should know which patient you are seeing, whether the patient is having, because generally in an ICU the scenario is all patients behave as diabetic, they are hyperglycemic, and most of them have as AKI, acute kidney injury, because of the underlying condition or a fever, dehydration, vomiting, their creatinine goes high and they give a picture of acute kidney AKI. So this is very important to correlate with other parameters. So this is the normal values. We refer to this Dr. Pandya's book. Normal blood volume 2 to 14 and the high is above 14 and dehydration is less than 14 or 0. When you see 0 level, it is a dehydrated patient, and adjust your output on the volume accordingly. So screening. So this is most important. Just download a screening form and very simple it is. You don't have to do two main questions, and ABC you can grade because ICU you have no time. If I have to see 100 patients from morning 8:30 to 12 o'clock, definitely I don't have time to do it. Of course, I will have students, interns, scholars with me who will be sitting and doing that, and then I will be taking around. So we go like this. Weight change. Important two questions. Weight change. Weight loss in past 2 weeks or from the duration of the admission, and whether it is significant, critical or lethal. Okay, and the functional, what is it? Normal or abnormal dietary intake, fed and unfed state instead of intake I said, because most of the patients critically ill prior to coming to the ICU are unfed state. They are not able to eat, so they are not fed. So how many weeks or days they are not fed, and functional capacity, whether they are ambulatory, not ambulatory, or whether their functional capacity is optimal, suboptimal or bedridden, or for how long, the duration. These two important questions will tell you. These are generally not done in an ICU. Anthropometry, everybody is talking, but BCA, we must do it with bioimpedance. We just cannot come to a nutritional status by height and weight, BMI. These are not the markers. So if we really want to do the nutritional status, those who are researchers, please, only anthropometry, only BMI, only waist circumference is not a study this thing. Anyway, this is not my topic. Then biochemical parameters, write down. Clinical notes of an intensivist, very important. You have to decide your therapy based on these guidelines. And assessment, dietary assessment, no need to do recall or anything, just number of days fed, unfed, the volume and what is fed. Mostly it is very minimal feeding prior to admission to the ICU. Okay, so what does the nutritional status comprise of a critically ill patient? It is characterized by hypermetabolism. So see the degree of hypermetabolism present, see the degree of protein catabolism present or muscle proteolysis, then insulin residence. As I told you, all the patients admitted to ICU will have insulin resistance and they will all behave like diabetic. Hyperglycemia will be a symptom, but they are not diabetic. Okay? So a good nutrition support aims to provide appropriate amount and composition of nutrients to counter these abnormalities. On this basis, you need to plan your therapy. So you must set your goals. So what are your goals? My first goal will be to control blood glucose. Okay. And the second goal will be do not allow fluctuations of the blood glucose. It should neither go very high nor go hypos. Hypos are more dangerous than hypers. I can okay manage by 180, 200, 220 blood sugar. My patients will still recover. But if it is hypo, less than 150, 60, I will lose the patient otherwise also. So therefore, the fluctuations I should see, the blood pressure I should see, and the method of feeding. How do I go? We use fragmented therapy. Fragmented, because these are all enteral patients. I will tell you later in detail. So follow your algorithm of feeding formula in an ICU person. Whether the GI tract intact, whether it is functioning. If you are not eating for 15 days, 1 month, definitely you have a compromised gut. If you are critically ill, you have again a compromised gut. So here you are seeing a patient with a compromised gut, and therefore you should decide what that gut will tolerate. So for EN tolerance, so follow this, and then 24 to 28 hours you must start feeding according to algorithm. In a recent evidence practice, we start as early as possible. No fixed time is written. Patient is stabilized or not stabilized. In my ICU, all intensive is no. Before I come on the round, all the patients should be fed at least the first feed. Otherwise, they have had it. So they will see that before I come for my round, they start feeding. They'll call or they will ask how much to be started, and they will tell me the clinical impression or notes or condition on phone. So I said, all right, you start. We have a protocol kept in an ICU. Start with 30 cc. Nobody will be harmed. Everybody will tolerate 30 cc. So there's a protocol of 30 cc. No water, no glucose. These are all banned in our ICU because we should not be doing. I have no time to tell you the reasons, but these are not the feedings. Okay, anything which is cooked or which is hot, if nothing is there, normal saline. That's the first feed, which goes completely sterile. I don't want to activate the gut bacteria which have been already there and not used for so long, and patient becomes more, there is a bacterial translocation, and he will become more sick or go into the sepsis. So these are the things you should keep the protocol, and then whether patient is having any other underlying conditions or whether undergone surgery. We'll have different patients in ICU, post CABG or other surgery or fractures, any number of, and these will be also NCD patients. And the excess, very important. What is the route of administration? Now you must have already learned in your undergraduate, post-graduation, there are short-term access and for long-term access. There's a transnasal tubes which goes directly from nose to the stomach, the Ryle's tube, and there is a long-term that is percutaneous tubes. So the blind or endoscopic applications are done at the bedside. You can put in a gastric tube. You can also put a duodenal or jejunal tube. If we need to do, we need to call in gastroenterologists. What we do is, we train our own enters, our own nurses will put nasogastric tube. And if my patient is not tolerating, we tell them, push the tube little further, make the patient lie lateral and push post pylori. And post pylori, I tell you, at 4th hour, 5th hour, or sometimes at 0 hour, on admission, we are able to feed, and the feeds are tolerated in our ICU. Okay, so that is the best way to feed patient. And then there will be a gastric and gastroenterology. These are surgical or percutaneous access you can do, and there are surgical also, surgical jejunostomy, surgical gastrostomy are done by the surgeons while operating the patients, and you can feed the patients. So why nutrition? Why it is preferred? So it maintains GI tract. And what is our goal? I want to protect my patient's GI tract, the function and the integrity, and also it stimulates. It keeps it active. Contractibility and trophic substance. So presence of food is important, no matter what it is. So I told you a saline or a vegetable soup, clear soup. It is just a boiled vegetable drained and kept, but it is going to keep your gut active, and your patient is going to tolerate the next feeds very, without any problems. So supports gut, mucosal and associated lymph. We know it's a gut is a most important immune organ is gut. If you want to make your patient enhanced, you need to protect your gut, and therefore you need to protect your GI system. Preserves gut microbiota. When we don't use gut, there are all unwanted bacteria there. So we want good bacteria. So by feeding the patients, we will have good bacteria in the gut. Prevents parenteral nutrition associated infective and metabolic morbidities. Most surgeons or intensive nay, I don't know about enteral. What my patient will do, starts parenteral, but it's more dangerous. You already have so many tubings. One more parenteral access, and parenteral is harmful because it has translocation of the bacteria. So unless it is necessary, the guidelines is unless it is you are not able to feed enteral, only go for the parenteral. So 24 to 48 hours, these are the guidelines I am just putting. ESPEN guideline, Canada guidelines say 24